Hey guys, and welcome to your training on macronutrients or macros. This is something that we try and dive into once we kind of get a handle on the calories that we're eating, as we look to try and get the best possible split between the different macros to give you the very best chance at getting the best out of each of them and making sure that the best suit for yourself. Some of it comes down to preference, some of it comes down to what we want you to try and aim for, and we're going to have a little run through each of the macros, their basic kind of principles and functions of what they do, and then really what it means for you in terms of macros, calorie counting, and having a good balance between the three. So first up, what are macronutrients? They are the three things behind the calories that we eat. So we have protein, carbohydrates, and fats. These three macronutrients basically make up all of the calories that you consume in your diet. So everything that we eat can be split down three different parts, which make up all of the calories that we eat and determine our macro split. We will start with carbs. So carbohydrates, including sugar, are for immediate energy usage and production of energy. So the muscles and everything in the body uses carbohydrates as an energy source, and then any carbohydrate that isn't used may then be stored as fat. This is where carbs often get vilified and everyone assumes if you eat too many carbs you automatically get fat. That's not going to be true. You will only gain fat from having a lot of carbohydrate if you go over your calorie maintenance level. So the whole carbs are bad thing is a little bit of a myth, and typically it's when people are over consuming carbs to such a level that they go into a calorie surplus and hence they gain body fat. The next macro after carbs is our fats. These are super important for body functions, regulating hormones, and also brain function. We need to ensure that we get fat on board. Again, fat is something that is vilified, something that we'll come to a little bit later as to why, but we do need essential fats to make sure that our body functions as it's supposed to. Finally, we have protein. Now, obviously, protein, especially for you guys, you know all about it. This is for not only the repair of muscle, but skins, different tissues. It serves a much more purpose than just the gains that we're looking for. That's the three macronutrients. But how does it apply to a long-term health and fitness, fat loss kind of journey? The first thing we need to consider is the amount of calories in each of them. This is going to bring us to why fat is often the villain of the group. So in fat, per gram of pure fat, there are 9 calories. That's compared to 4 in carbohydrates and 4 in protein. Hence why fat, as it is as a macronutrient, is seen as more expensive in energy because it has more energy in it per gram. So if you do have a high fat diet, essentially what you're going to be doing is reducing the amount of food you can eat, reducing the amount of grams you can have before you reach a certain calorie target. In most cases, that's going to be maintenance level to stay below a point at which we're going to be gaining weight. Proteins and carbs both come in at 4 calories per gram. This means that they are pretty interchangeable in terms of the effect that they're going to have on the amount of calories that you are consuming. What we do as part of Nathan Lee training is, first off, the most important thing we look at is calories at the top, and then when we start to look into the macronutrients, we move down into protein first. Now there's a good reason for this. Protein is great for obviously building the muscle that we want to try and build, also maintaining muscle when you're in a fat loss phase. It's really difficult once you're experienced at training to gain muscle and lose fat at the same time. Not impossible, but very difficult. By having a high protein diet and the stimulus of training, you do as much as you can to hold on to the muscle that you've got whilst you're in a fat loss phase. If you're newer to training, there is like the unicorn zone where you can typically lose body fat and gain muscle mass together, but the rate of each tends to slow down. depending on what your focus is. So if you're really focused on losing body fat, typically it's going to be quite hard to gain muscle. Conversely, if you are then trying to gain muscle, it's going to be hard to try and lose body fat. So there's a balance to be struck in terms of trying to achieve both. But typically people would choose to focus on one or the other, go through stages of muscle gain with a minimal amount of fat gain, and then fat loss with minimal amount of muscle loss. Now, to work out your protein level, we would ideally know your lean body mass. If you've ever used like a Tanita scales whereby you hold onto the metal handles, it will give you a rough estimate of how much lean mass you have. They aren't necessarily the best measure of your lean body mass. To get a true measure, you actually have to use something called a bod pod, which is a water submersion thing. Way too advanced for a lot of people. That's typically what they have at universities to do studies with. So we kind of have to try and do it to the best of our ability. What we typically look for in the amount of protein that we're going to ask you to go for is between 1.6 and 2.2 grams per kilo of lean body mass. If we weighed 100 kilos and you had 20% body fat, we'd estimate that the lean mass was going to be around 80 minus some bone mass and stuff, but that's almost negligible. It's not too much of your mass. Take that 80 kilos, times it from 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein, and that would give us the amount of protein you would have in your diet. This amount of protein is going to give you the best possible chance of having the building blocks for the muscles that you're using to repair, grow, and obviously ultimately achieve the kind of looks that you're going for. But as we said, it can be give and take a little bit, and it just requires a little bit of playing around to make sure that we're getting the right amounts for you. Once we've got the protein amounts sorted within your calories, we then look to make sure we're going to get enough fat in the diet. As we mentioned previously, the ratio between fats and carbs is a lot based around your preference for diets. For example, if you enjoy a Mediterranean style diet, your fats are likely to be higher, the carbs will come slightly lower. So once we've got that protein level sorted, we typically look to set fats at around 20 to 25% of your calorie intake. Now this can vary anywhere from a minimum of around about 10%, just to make sure we have those bodily functions we mentioned earlier, up to a limit whereby we're consuming a lot of fat, which would take away from the amount of volume of food and drink that we can actually take on board. Once we then have the protein and the fat amounts, the carbs just make up the rest of what we have available. Now, the fats and the carbs are interchangeable. So if you do have different style of days, if you go out, for example, they might come and go. So typically the best way to look at that is for every gram of fat you were to go over, you would minus 2 grams of carbs roughly, because carbs is 4 calories per gram and fat is 9 calories per gram. So it's a roughly 2-to-1 ratio on that one. The important thing to remember though, regardless of how you spend your calories, is it is the calories that count when it comes to fat loss. In theory, you could have a diet that was pure fat. As long as you were still in a calorie deficit, you would lose body fat. Naturally, that's not going to be the healthiest thing to do in terms of overall nutrition and just getting the right sort of things into your body, but that is what would happen over, again, a prolonged period. So the most important thing to remember is, yes, you can get the perfect macro split and you can try different things, but calories equated will always be the most important thing for fat loss. So that kind of covers most of the macronutrient stuff I think you guys would need to know at a base level. Obviously, you can go and read into a lot more around each of them independently and kind of what they can offer you depending on the splits that you go with. Just wanted to touch on what's sometimes called the fourth macronutrient, which is alcohol. So pure alcohol has 7 calories per gram. So when you look at, for example, a shot of vodka or gin, despite it only being a tiny amount, it's typically around about 70 to 90 calories for that small amount. And that will come mostly from the alcohol content in there, which obviously at 7 calories per gram only puts it just off of pure fat, and then 3 calories per gram heavier than both protein and carbs. And then, of course, when you look at alcohol in things such as beer, cider and wine, it is then also combined with plenty of carbs. So you end up with a perfect storm of very calorie heavy, non-nutritious alcohol. We will cover more on alcohol in one of the future trainings, but for now, that's a good little start and introduction into macros and actually what they mean and how they kind of are split up on this journey that you're on for the NLT 100.